Knowing that anyone involved in the creation of Steins Gate was also involved in the creation of Steins Gate Zero came as a shock to me, because the original deserves to be talked about in writing classes, and the sequel belongs on fanfiction.net. And yes, I'm being unfair to the halfway decent fanfic authors out there with that comparison, but anyone who's read enough fan sequels to popular shows should be able to tell what I'm talking about. You see, fanfic authors are usually people with a strong attachment to the central cast of characters who just want to imagine them continuing to have interactions and adventures together, but since they aren't actually writers by trade and don't know anything about creating coherent stories or developing the characters in meaningful ways, their stories end up amounting to a lot of the characters just hanging out in a massive group, repeating key phrases and memes which they're known for having said in the original, and generally reliving the shit that already happened, before finally enacting a plot which is basically the same thing that happened last time, but with a cobbled together new set of paper-thin villains and side characters, and about 1,000% less narrative drive or coherence. You don't need a writing degree to have heard the common wisdom that it's most exciting to consume a story in which the main character, the protagonist, is actually driving the story forward. You may have heard phrases like proactive versus reactive characters, or about how it can be boring to have the protagonist remaining on the defensive for too long. You hear these things commonly not only because everyone and their grandma is a media analyst nowadays, but also because everyone's mom and her dog has tried their hand at writing something and gotten ass blasted over it by some dickbag on the internet. Steins Gate has always been accused of having a slow start and taking a while for the plot to really kick in, but I find this to be a brutal mischaracterization of the show, couched in the fact that the first episodes ask a lot for you to pay attention to and keep track of to really process what's happening. And when the tension finally ramps up in earnest, it goes to fucking 11 and basically stays there for the entirety of the series from that point forward. But none of that tension would have meant a goddamn thing if not for the extensive legwork put into getting us there. In the first episode of the original show, Ocarine stumbles upon the grisly murder scene of the young scientist Makise Kurisu, attempts to send his friend Daru a text about it, and then finds himself unknowingly transported to an alternate timeline in which Kurisu is still alive. We are shown all of this happening, but because we don't actually know how it happens, we just seem to be looped into a bizarre paradox interpreted through the unreliable mind of a paranoid Chuni. Right off the bat, even though he doesn't realize it, Okabe has set the plot into motion. From that point onward, he is trying to figure out what the hell happened using the limited resources at his disposal, including internet rumors, his super hacker best friend, the limited connections of his autistic childhood companion, which happen to include a very important maid girl whom we'll later learn is the heiress to half the property in Akihabara, and of course the mysteriously still alive Makise Kurisu. In the process of trying to figure out what happened, Okabe and Kurisu discover the secret to an incredibly limited form of time travel, just in the nick of time before the science organization CERN finds out about it and shows up to take it, murdering Mayuri in the process. At this point, the plot setup is basically over. Everything from this point forward is just about studying all the factors at play and moving between timelines until all of the changes to the future have been undone. At this point, we've seamlessly transitioned from a mystery story into a puzzle game thriller, whose intrigue is driven entirely by the emotional state of the protagonist as he tries to undo the consequences of his personality and the decisions that he made which led him here. It would stand to reason then that Steins Gate Zero begin with the conceit of trying to solve the mystery of how to save Makise Kurisu. However, since we already know that the solution ends up being incredibly simple, there would have been no way to dedicate an entire second story to coming to this conclusion. Perhaps then it could have been about figuring out how to build a proper time travel device, but that would have probably required an endless amount of ass-pull technobabble and little in the way of narrative motion, unless they were going to pull some kind of heist on CERN to steal the technology or something, which actually could have been better than what we got. A heist gone wrong which has to be reconstructed using limited time travel loops? Yeah, you could do it like the Hunter x Hunter Chimera Ant arc while focusing on how the butterfly effect of every minor change in decision causes a time-sensitive mission with a ton of moving parts to completely alter course. Anyone has my permission to make a story with this gimmick. No, the only way this was going to make sense with the canon of the original story was going to be to tell a completely unrelated story with only tangential connections to the canon wherever gaps could be created and then subsequently filled in, which could have easily gotten hilariously out of hand if they'd had us try to juggle the continuities of all the abandoned world lines which Okabe passed through, and that could have been a lot of fun, but instead they decided to keep that kind of thing to a minimum and focus on the new story. So what is the driving force of this new story? Well, there is none. Not at first anyways. We're reintroduced to the old characters, new ones are threaded in, and Okabe finds out about this AI technology which some former associates of Kurisu have been building, and that's about it. I mean, it's clear that this technology will be relevant somehow, but there's nothing to go on. No hook, no story, just a new plot element whose relevance is entirely unknown. Is the existence of AI technology supposed to be a gripping enough mystery for us to want to know more? Would anyone feel compelled to continue beyond this point if they didn't already care about these characters because they enjoyed the original series? I've seen many accounts online of people dropping the original show because they thought the first episode was boring, and I can't even imagine how those people would fare if they tried to sit through this one. In episode 2, we conveniently discover that the team behind this AI technology happened to have entirely transcribed Kurisu's memories and thought patterns into their AI program Amadeus, thus allowing the most popular character from the original series to functionally live again in the sequel where the entire conceit is that she's supposed to be dead in this universe. Great, and that's all that happens. Okabe is invited to carry around a phone app which lets him talk to her whenever he wants, so I guess the driving force of the show is now, hey guys, all your favorite characters are back. Flashing forward a bit, at the end of episode 3 and start of episode 4, we start to get suggestions that Okabe's reading Steiner is activating again, but since he assumes that it can't be possible, he pursues the train of thought no further. Riveting. Meanwhile, it is retconned in that when Suzuha was time traveling around and getting to this point, she had originally been carrying future Mayuri's adoptive daughter Kagari around with her, but lost her 12 years in the past and is trying to locate her again. So now we've got that going on. Do we care? No. Then like an episode later, they find her. Yay! But she has amnesia. Boo. But then a few episodes later, she remembers who she is. Yay! In the meantime, episode 6 pretends that things are finally going to get moving when a scene paralleling the CERN break-in from the original show happens and Kagari is about to be kidnapped. But then at the start of the next episode, Mr. Brown just comes in and beats the living shit out of them all and they leave. The consequences of this break-in are precisely nothing, and now the attacker is looking competent and non-threatening anyways. Aside from realizing that someone is after them, the characters learn precisely nothing, and in turn change nothing about their day-to-day lives. They don't put Kagari under enhanced protection, or alert the authorities, or even make much of an attempt to figure out what the fuck just happened. The show just reverts to business as usual until the next unrelated plot reveal / tension spike, which is resolved the same way. This is the baffling ebb and flow of Steins Gate Zero's first 16 goddamn episodes. It's constantly buttering you up for something to finally happen, and then instantly killing the tension completely so the characters can stand around talking about it. If you've ever seen YMS's videos on season 2 of The Walking Dead, then you'll almost certainly have flashbacks to the way he described its methods of wasting time and postponing meaningful drama for as long as it fucking can. At one point, the Amadeus system is at risk of being hacked, then in the next episode, this legal lolly girl is just like, oh, we beat back the hackers for now, so it's okay. And that's that. Tension thoroughly deflated, consequences absolutely zero. Let's think back to the original show. Every time Okabe was fucked, he was truly and royally fucked. It seemed like the invisible hand of CERN was lurking behind every shadow when they'd find countless new and unexpected ways to track down and murder Mayuri. Every single escape was a mad dash to the time leap machine to scrape by just in the nick of time, and often there'd be no time to rest before new ideas had to be set into motion. It wasn't until a wizened and well-traveled Ocarine had figured out how to operate efficiently enough to save himself some extra time that he could actually catch a breather, which is what made his unraveling mental state so believable and the scenario so balls-clenchingly difficult to watch at times. This wasn't just an effort to keep the show exciting, but also to cover its tracks. One was not asked to think too hard about the mechanisms holding this wacky-ass time travel plot together, because the shit was constantly hitting the fan, and it was obvious that the science fiction elements were incidental to the emotional narrative at the core of the series. Everyone was always in a hurry once the plot got moving. Suzuha's time machine, for instance, couldn't be left on the roof for too long or else it might get seen and potentially cause a time paradox. The sequel handwaves this problem by telling us that Ferris Nyan Nyan happens to own this building and is renting out the top 2 floors to them so they can continue their time travel research there. It's not even clear how much she actually knows about this, like if she actually realizes that Suzuha is from the future, but this is also the closest we get to an explanation of how the fuck Suzuha is even living in this world. I guess Ferris brings her leftovers from the maid cafe and that's what she's subsisted off of for 6 months? Why didn't she just get a part-time job like she did in the original show? Oh, it's because it's going to be a plot point later when her and Kagari coincidentally take up work at Mr. Brown's TV repair shop again. And Suzuha couldn't have just quit her other job to do this. Why? Could we at least try to make this story believable? Look, Steins Gate was never exactly an airtight, super plausible science fiction story, and it never even pretended to be one. Right from the beginning, it seemed to take place in a slightly bizarro, tongue-in-cheek version of reality, where a presumed crashed satellite is allowed to dangle above passing citizens and not be squared off by police and safely removed, in Tokyo of all cities. And a time machine is created by connecting a cell phone to a microwave and powered by the signal wave of a large CRT television in the room below, which turns bananas into gel bananas, mostly because it's hilarious to say the word geru banana in Japanese. Also, the evil world domination organization that the characters are fighting is fucking CERN, who'd probably be seen as utterly benign to anyone other than paranoid conspiracy theorists worried that the Large Hadron Collider was going to create a black hole. The joke then is the fact that it kind of does. The main character is a paranoid delusional. His companions are a turbo geek and a mildly functional autistic girl, and they all speak in 2-channel memes half the time. None of this could ever be a strain on your disbelief because it was never asking you to believe any of it. You're meant to become invested in the characters and the atmosphere of the story, have your brain tickled by its entertaining sci-fi ideas, and chuckle over recognizing all the references, right up until the rug is pulled out from under it all and Okabe has to hit the ground running right through an endless sequence of edgy, badass, and emotionally gripping scenes that largely don't make any goddamn sense anyways. Like, okay, if Mr. Brown was FB all along, does that change at all in the beta timeline? When Moeka goes to work for him again in the end, is she unknowingly taking a second job from this same boss, and is Ocarine just okay with knowing that he rents his room from an assassination squad? The show isn't interested in answering this question, so it asks you to just believe whatever you feel like. That is, until Steins Gate Zero seems to simultaneously suggest that Mr. Brown is indeed still FB and has all the same power he did before, but that Moeka doesn't work for FB in this timeline, but does still have secret agent skills, but is hired in service of Ferris instead? What the hell is going on? While we're on the subject of Moeka, we have to mention the embarrassingly transparent misdirects peppered all throughout this show to make it seem like something intriguing is going on when it isn't. For instance, when the lab gets raided for the first time, Kagari is taken by a woman in a black spandex outfit looking exactly like Moeka did in the first season. Ocarine assumes that it's her right away, but considering the fact that she'd been given a helmet, it's pretty obvious that this isn't going to be the case. Now, the only female characters missing from the room in this scene are Moeka and the woman who's supposed to be Daru's future wife, Amane Yuki. So of course, she is the immediate suspect. Sure enough, the show then leans into the suspicion when Yuki's arm is bandaged the next time we see her in exactly the place where the jumpsuit girl had been kicked during the skirmish. Cool, you might think at this moment, there's something going on with this character. I can't wait to find out what hidden traumas may have led her into this mercenary life, and how Daru is going to overcome those problems and make her fall in love with him, as Suzuha is constantly insisting he needs to make happen. Next time we see a spandex girl, she gets shot in the other arm, and wouldn't you know it, Yuki's other arm is injured right afterwards, and since she still has done literally nothing in the course of the season yet, this must be build up for one hell of a payoff, right? Nope, sucker, it's a misdirect! And worse off, it's a misdirect with no payoff whatsoever, and Yuki continues to do absolutely nothing for the entire fucking show! The way the build up is abated comes off really fucking bizarre too. There's a dramatic reveal at one point that Kagari herself is in fact one of the leather spandex girls working for the bad guy, and it almost feels like the show expects you to take this as the resolution to that mystery, even though we all saw Kagari get taken in that initial break-in scene. At this point, because of the fact that Kagari happens to look exactly like Makise Kurisu, and this still hasn't been explained yet, P.S. it never is, my wife had theorized that maybe there were a bunch of clones of Kurisu running around, since a major plot point of the series was already that they had created an AI copy of her. But nope, it turns out that the other spandex girl was just this random assistant character who was introduced for like 2 minutes earlier in the series and had maybe 10 lines of dialogue up to this point, and you find out when she gets fucking brained in the final conflict. Great reveal. Cared a lot. Totally justified an entire show worth of misdirection trying to convince me Yuki would ever matter in any way. Remember that fantasy I had about Daru capturing her heart by helping her to face her inner demons? What we get instead is this painfully cringe-inducing episode about all the girls trying to help Daru become a ladies' man so he can woo her, only for it to it turns out that she likes him for himself anyways, and they start dating, I guess. I would have said it was the worst thing I've ever seen if I wasn't going to later watch future Ferris Nyan Nyan gadding soldiers while future Rukuko murders people with a fucking samurai sword, but the future scenes in this show might need to get their own entire video at some point. Suffice it to say that never actually showing the post-apocalyptic future it suggested was one of the original show's best decisions. Mr. X aside, the show also pulls a lot of the oldest, saddest tricks in the book to turn the story into a soap opera. Mayuri gets shot at the end of one episode, but then in the next it's like, oh, don't worry, it just grazed her. Great. Couldn't leave at least a little bit of tension in the air in a show where I already know that preventing Mayuri's death via time travel is like the main fucking conceit of the entire plot. But then this is a show where a dramatic kiss is paired with a cheesy, overwrought pop song, so dignity doesn't seem to be in its wheelhouse of tricks. By the time substantive action had finally been taken in episode fucking 17 of Steins Gate Zero, I was frankly just exhausted with the whole thing. Up to that point, it felt like I was tonally stuck on episode 3. Watching the main character who drove the entire plot of the original literally piss around, too terrified to take action, was boring and made me hate him. Seeing every single goddamn character shoehorned into every possible scene just to cram as many familiar faces onto the screen as they could get away with left me more and more cynical and jaded every single time it happened, especially at the Christmas party when they crowbarred Nai in there just to get every single girl into a Christmas outfit, even though Mr. Brown would have fucking never let Nai hang out with this gaggle of adult freaks in the original series. None of the characters in this show have any lick of personality besides Suzuha, whose entertainment value and actually decent redesign, tits aside, made her the only thing that kept this show even remotely sit-throughable for me. An embarrassing amount of dialogue in the early episodes involves characters dumping expositional information which their conversation partners should already be aware of. This is bad writing 101. Considering Steins Gate had some of my favorite dialogue in anime history, it's also depressing to think about, especially when the same motherfucking dude wrote the script. Like, what the fuck, Juki Hinata? Why are you so inconsistent? In the original show, the question of who to tell what about the discoveries which the heroes were making was a matter of careful consideration and concern, with clear ramifications if certain people were privy to certain things at certain times. In Steins Gate Zero, information is a convenient way to elongate the episode count. The arbitrary decision on one character's part to not tell another about their secret plans allows the plot to progress in one direction, and then the information is shared when the plot needs to progress in another direction. Meanwhile, when there's not enough going on to fill out a 22-minute episode, you can throw in a few lines of internal monologue where characters stand around pondering who they should tell what. None of this is entertaining to watch, and seeing the mechanism of it all is like catching the writer with his pants down. In place of witty and entertaining vocal sparring matches, the show is instead overburdened with attempts at emotional heart-to-hearts, none of which are earned by the events of the sequel's plot, and instead rely on the fact that we already care about these characters from the first season to assume that we'll care about their overwrought emotional outbursts in this one. But since I couldn't actually relate these characters to the people that they used to be in my mind, it was difficult to give a fuck about basically anything in the sequel. If the laziness of this show's writing comes to a head somewhere, it's in the concoction of its main villain. Throughout the series, this guy is presented as a stupid-ass, obnoxious comic relief character whose broken Japanese and horrid English stops being funny immediately. At first, the laziness manifests as this character seemingly involving Ocarina in the plot just because he's a wacky dumb asshole, but in the end it turns out that this was all according to Keikaku, when the laziness then manifests as this character's entire plot and motivations being dumped in one long, pointless monologue right before Suzuha kicks the living shit out of him, and then he does precisely nothing new in the plot while Okabe finds the route to thwarting him. This character is unthreatening, uninteresting, and obnoxious, and the fact that Daru tells Suzuha not to kill him because she would be no better than he is, right after we just watched her gun down like 30 fucking guys in a row, retched the biggest, driest, and most tired from my lungs that I've ever breathed in my life. I've still got at least another half hour of bitching to do about this show, so we're gonna call it a day for now and pick this up in the next one where I'll complain about the rest of the characters and how badly this show fucks up the appeal of the series. Meanwhile, if you need more stuff to watch, check out my new collaborative gaming review channel, I Am Games, which also live streams the games we review on Twitch every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. EST and Fridays at midnight. Support me on Patreon if you like this ranting, and thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one.